Our topic today is miracles. And I'm trying to figure that out. It was interesting to hear how Bishop Spong goes through miracles, because the Bible undoubtedly talks about things that are supernatural, beyond the normal, beyond what you and I experience or can do on a regular basis. And so if we are spiritual people, why can't we? Why don't we? Right, is the question. And there's often a lot of judgment in that type of question, isn't there? Why isn't your church like this? In a couple of weeks, is it this Sunday? This Sunday or next Sunday, I'm going to talk about the spiritual gifts, and people have all kinds of ideas about what should happen with spiritual gifts. And if a church isn't doing this, then they're not really a church of the Spirit. But as you read through what what Bishop Spong said, he took a whole different take on that. His basic take was, you don't have to have a actual miracle to use miracles as a way of being able to signal something. He talked about John and how John called them not miracles, but signs. Signs of. Tell me what your experience of miracles has been like in your life, both good and bad.
According to how you define the word miracle.
It does, according to how you define it. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. I like the term small miracles.
I mean, I see miracles every day, as far as nature, even little things like the birds on my bird feeder and stuff, or yes, just how mild my case of COVID was. To me, the vaccines are a miracle.
Vaccines are a miracle.
It's like but there's a science-based miracles, but still, I don't know.
But that's why I like the term that both John and it looked like Bishop Spong kind of gravitated towards, and that's the word sign. Is it a sign of something more than just what's there? Is it wrong for science to surpass some of Jesus's miracles with science? I don't think so, because I think that shows that God is still present and moving. You just have to accept that religion is not the only purveyor of miracles. And some of my friends, that's what they don't want to do.
They don't want to take the power of God away from him. They want him or her. They want God to have the ultimate power and control over everything. And God have the ultimate power and the control everything. But science can still make advances. And that's the thing that I don't understand is they don't want science to make advances because it's making God a lot smaller, isn't it?
I think that's their fear, is that if...
But they're the ones who are making God smaller.
Yeah.
By not allowing science, by not figuring that God has given us science, in our lives and everything. So I think they make God smaller personally.
Yeah. Some religion has a heavy investment in an us against them, religion against science. And so science can't be enlarged and God enlarged with it, because that would go against the paradigm they've set up.
Never changing.
Mm-hmm.
The church has always been against science. I mean, way back when the earth was always flat, or the church has burned so many people at the stake, and Galileo all the way back, all the way through history and stuff, they've been against that. But I think too, it's according to how you, this all goes back for me and how you define the term God too.
Yeah.
I mean, who do you consider God to be? I mean, the fact that you even put a gender on God is troubling to me. And just the whole thing about how do you even wrap your head around God? Plus, if you look at all the miracles that God supposedly did in the Old Testament, God was a very vindictive, nasty God, very tribal. And I've always had trouble with God and miracles.
Yeah. But wasn't it interesting that Bishop Spong essentially in the writings pointed out that miracles only really entered into the Old Testament story in two places.
Yes.
Moses and Joshua story, and then later in the Elisha story. That it was only at those 2 points, the start of the law and the start of the prophets, the two pillars of Judaism, that's where miracles entered the story. That even that they weren't seen as something important to put in the rest of all of those books. But yet we expect them to be every day for us. Or too often we expect that, don't we?
I think expect is a good word. You know, that we expect miracles. If something is happening in our life, we expect a miracle. And then when the miracle we wanted, not necessarily the one we should be getting, but the miracle we wanted doesn't occur, then we find some other justification why that didn't happen, rather than the fact that maybe God does not interfere in our lives, and that the miracles are what we should be seeing, as Judy says, in the wonderful earth that we have, and how we've been given the gifts to help ourselves.
I go back on a regular basis to an experience that happened to me 20, 30 years ago. I was driving across Kansas, going up to Minnesota to see my boys. And as I went there, suddenly I realized I'm in the path of a tornado that had crossed through the day before. And you can just see the stark difference, the line of demarcation between where the tornadoes had reached and beyond. It was just remarkable. And at almost that same time, I'm listening to Christian radio, and someone came on and talked to the DJ and said, thank God that they were safe because the tornado was close to their house, but didn't do any damage to their house. And that's a great prayer, isn't it? I can only imagine what those homeowners felt as that storm went by. And then the DJ said this: yes, God certainly does protect those he loves. Forgetting that yards, or at least miles from that person's house, were other houses of presumably some pretty faithful people who God didn't protect. And so we take the miracle, because having a storm come that close and not have damage, that's a miracle. But then we warp it into something different. God protected you, right?
Not this other person.
But not this other person. And we do that type of stuff way too often. I have the miracle. I can talk in tongues, but you can't. This shows how close I am to God. And in this case, it wasn't the woman who was taking that on herself. It was the DJ who was misrepresenting what she had said and putting an institutional thing on it that said God works in this way.
I think there's an even more evil side of that. Through the probably 17th and 18th and some of the 19th century, the gentry in Europe and even in the United States felt that if they got richer, it was God was blessing them. That's fine, but He was blessing them because they were good, and that's why they got richer. And that, to me, is just pretty evil. Really.
Yeah, they were using miracles, or at least the inequity of money, to be able to justify a continuation of a bad pattern rather than a good pattern.
And a justification of slavery.
A
Because they were
justification of
getting
slavery. Yep. God
whole
gave me this type of power.
That whole Joel Osteen thing of where, it's that God favors me, and so you can be rich if you just do these things and follow me.
Yep.
But I had trouble when I was with the evangelicals. I know they were big on, if you were ill, they'd lay hands on you and anoint you with oil and stuff. And it was always a miracle would occur if you were righteous enough and you believed hard enough. But if you weren't cured, which I never was, well, it was like.
But we know of your wickedness, Judy.
Well, but it's like it's if there's not a miracle occurring, then it's your fault, that you're to blame. And it's that whole it's a justification. To me, miracles are a justification for tribalness. It's like it's still putting that whole patriarchal thing of us against them in the whole narrative, which to me is a problematic part of religion at the very basis of it.
Right, and that was at least part of what Bishop Spong was pointing out with these chapters we read, that these miracles happened with Moses and Joshua because that showed that God was with them, and God started all this. With Elijah and Elisha, that God was speaking still, continued to be there and present with them, and it was essentially putting down your credentials. Now, credentials aren't bad, but it doesn't say, because your credential says you're a carpenter, it doesn't say you're a good carpenter, or that you know how to do this job. And yet we try to use it that way, that this credential that I have miracles now makes it so that I have all credibility. God has accepted me. And you're right. When we do that, Judy, we are absolutely perverting what's supposed to happen here. So what are miracles for? Why are they continually present in the narratives? I think at some point Dr. Spong asked the question about would Judaism have been able to survive without miracles? Would it have captivated people's imagination without that?
What I found interesting was that he said that in Judaism today, there's not that much talk about miracles, even though the stories are there in their Bible. What I'm wondering about is, because the miracles didn't get put into the New Testament until later writings, and that the earliest writers didn't even address miracles, which you would have thought would have been the first thing they put in there if they had experienced or heard about miracles at that time, that maybe they weren't getting big enough crowds, and that's why they started putting the miracle stories in.
Maybe. Or they were trying to justify a choice that others weren't making. Well, this is right because look what, and isn't it interesting that in Paul's writings, there's no mention of miracles, right? The first writings that we have, there's nothing there of this miraculous. You would think that Paul would speak of that, but he doesn't even speak what Luke later tells in the first part of Acts about his own miracle on the road to Damascus. Does he?
No.
I mean, he says some things maybe parallel to it, maybe telling the same thing, but he definitely doesn't say it in the way that Luke tells it.
And do all the religions have some kind of supernatural power about them? Oh, I don't know.
He didn't say it definitively. Everyone has that, but he did say something about how in almost every religious tradition there are.
Most Abrahamic religions do, I know, but
yeah, but I think it's pretty true about everything and about all religious traditions, because here's the thing. We think religion lifts us to a different or a higher plane, and I think it does. The question is what kind of plane is that? It's that I can walk on water and you can't because of my religion, or because I open my eyes to something that maybe you're not seeing, that my religion allows me to view the world in ways that you're not.
Do you think also that it has to do with suffering? Because if I know that this God who is with this religion is performing miracles, maybe those miracles will take away my suffering. So I want to go with that God. I know that in the Dalai Lama's writings, and he talks about suffering, and he's not talking about miracles, and he's talking about, basically that suffering is a part of being a human, but it's a totally different look at it. It's not like, there is a God that's going to take it away. There is a way to live that will take the suffering away. And so, but I'm thinking with the other miracles, I really don't know that much about Hindu religions, but I know a couple of movies that I've watched, which are great places to get good information. People have prayed to their God for something to happen. Well, that's asking for a miracle, isn't it?
It is asking for a miracle. And much of how we use prayer, and we'll get to that in a couple of weeks, much of how we use prayer is an attempt to try to invoke miracle, invoke something beyond the natural. And so
also that it's this the whole concept of heaven is, well, first of all, heaven was talked about things up above before we knew what was actually in space. Now we know what space is.
Very different than what they thought back then.
And so, but it's that whole thing of there being a life after death. That, like, I know, I don't think a lot of people would be Christian if they didn't think there was a life after death. Because that's one of the main, the fear of death is one of their basic human qualities. And it's one of the things that religion has to address, is that whole thing of what happens when you die, because I am just so unique and special, and all my thoughts and stuff can't just go into vapor. It has to, I have to exist in some other plane.
I have to be perpetuated. My ego has to be perpetuated.
That's exactly what that is, isn't it?
Yeah, that whole thing is like, and I asked a friend of mine one time, I said, if there wasn't a heaven and hell, would you still be a Christian? And she said, actually, probably not. Which I thought was,
yeah, which I do believe, as I talk to many of my conservative friends, I believe they I think they believe in hell more than they believe in Jesus. They would hate that I would say that about them, but it feels like it.
You know, there's so many people that irritate me. I hope there is a hell. I mean,
Which of course is exactly why we have that concept there, because we know the ways that other people deserve the fires of.
That's why I think your friends believe more in hell or find it more important than heaven, maybe. I see heaven as an end to suffering, and that may just be death.
It may just be death. I have definitely seen where people, I mean, I've sat at enough hospital bedsides as people were going through the difficulty of the end of life, the suffering of that time, to know that death was sometimes the miracle.
Yes.
The hard part about that, of course, is if that's a person I love, it doesn't feel like a miracle to me in that moment.
No, because you never want to lose your loved one.
No. And the hard part about miracles is I think it's hard for us to escape from something that's for me miraculous instead of something that's for someone else. And at least the way that Bishop Spong explained the different miracles in these chapters, it was all about trying to set up something that was for the other. It wasn't to aggrandize Moses. It was to say there's something special happening in this strand of who we are. That God had a hand in starting this community that we are a part of. Now that can lead to what we talked about earlier, and I'm special and you're not. But it can also be, how do I continue that strand of for others? Do I believe in miracles in order to say how good I am, or to bring something to somebody else, to enlarge the life of somebody else? I've seen a lot of people brag about the ways they speak in tongues, or that they've had these ecstatic experiences that I'm not certain are truly the miracles that they think they are.
They brag about being able to speak in tongues, don't they?
Uh-huh. It's almost like an expected mark to be able to prove that you are of the Spirit.
Many years ago, the church I was going to, and I don't even remember where we were living at the time, had a seminar on spiritual gifts. And they had a list of spiritual gifts, and speaking in tongues was one of those gifts. And I thought it was so strange. And I've thought about that occasionally, and I don't know, I had thought that this spiritual gifts seminar was actually a Methodist seminar, but that was also probably at least 40 years ago. So I'm wondering how Methodists would do spiritual gifts now.
Well, I'm going to tell you how this Methodist is going to talk on Sunday. Because on Sunday, I'm dealing with the spiritual gifts. The passage from Ephesians that talks about the different spiritual gifts. And it says this: to each is given, to all. And so if I use it in a way that says I have and you don't, am I holding up what that passage is saying? Or am I looking at Judy and say, Judy, you got to have a gift in there somewhere. Let's work and try to figure out what it is. Am I in some way or another trying to draw and help that other person into that miracle that they are, that spiritual person that they are? Or do I write them off because they haven't manifested whatever I think is right?
Well, and I know this is going back decades, but back when I was a teenager, I was in rural West Virginia, up in the hollers of West Virginia, doing some poverty work. And I went to, I mean, some of these churches back there were pretty fundamentalist. And there was a friend of mine was staying, we each stayed, there were two of us working in that, up in the hollers there. And she was staying with one family, and this woman in the family was very, very crippled. And she walked with a cane and had a hard time moving. But when she would go to Sunday services, man, the Spirit would fill her up and she could dance and move around in ways that was like, it was a friggin' miracle. And it was like, for that short amount of time, the Spirit would envelop her and she could move. But as soon as she left the church, it was back to being her crippled self. And you know, it's like having this adrenaline rush that you get sometimes, that you're able to do superhuman feats and things. And I guess it wasn't every Sunday she was able to do this, but a lot of Sundays. And it was seen by the people there as miracles. And you know, it was a basic part of who they were, you know, that this was a part of their lives. There was a snake handling church back there also, and I never went there because let me tell you, there's no way I'm going to be around snake handlers. You're not going to catch, I don't care how many miracles they say happen, I'm not going there. But it was just a really interesting kind of culture that enveloped these people, you know. It was just, and they didn't have a lot of contact with the outside world either. So,
well, and sometimes that's the challenge. And first of all, let me just say this. I'm glad you were there, because I think that you being able to be there is, for me, in some ways, a manifestation of the gift of tongues. Because to be there, you have to speak differently than what you learned growing up. And so you have to speak into a different culture, into a different way of being. And so to me, that's part of how spiritual gifts play out. All right. I don't believe that the ecstatic experience of yelling in a different language in a worship service is the gift of tongues. I believe what you did in being there present was more that gift.
Wow, I love that.
I hadn't thought about it that way.
I think that the thing we have to ask about spiritual gifts and about miracles is, for what purpose? What does it do? Right? The miracles that Bishop Spong spoke about, especially the Old Testament miracles, were defining a people, and we're placing they're forming a community where the work of God could be done and seen. Right? That through that kingdom of Israel, the whole world might be blessed. Not so that the kingdom of Israel comes and becomes a static, ingrown community, which is sometimes what always happens. And you kind of describe some of that when you describe something like a snake handler church that says this is the only way that I can experience God, and you can't have any part of it unless you do it the same way as me. That doesn't feel to me like the movement of what miracles are about. Miracles are about making it so that we can show the miraculous nature of who we are out into the world. Does that make sense?
a lot more sense to me than, I never understood why why that whole thing of God punished the Egyptian, why he would favor this group over. I mean,
Yeah.
I never understood why God like killed the whole human race except for what was on Noah's Ark. To me, that's a mass murder scene.
Yeah.
Same thing with like, having the Red Sea, which was actually a swamp, envelop the Egyptian, the Roman. It's just, the whole thing was always to me very tribal, and I never really liked that God. That's why I've always had trouble with the Old Testament God. It's like, it's so, that God is so punishing and so vindictive and so tribal that I have a hard time with that.
Yeah. And that's because when it started, the stories that were told around the campfires, as Dr. Spong pointed out in here, the ones about Moses, who probably lived in the 13th century but weren't written down for 300 or plus years, they were trying to form, who are we? Okay, so they're formational stories that are trying to give an identity to this group. And so they were very tribal in that way. But that tribalism became an us against them tribalism, rather than just a definition of us tribalism. And that, you're right, that's where it becomes less than helpful, I think.
Well, and that's very much carried through in the evangelical church today. I was there. I know. I mean, it's very much an us versus them. You're either with us or you're against us.
Yeah. What's really interesting about that, though, is that's more, I think, a manifestation of Old Testament theology than what it is New Testament theology. Because Jesus, even though he said some us versus them statements, the whole of who he was and how he acted was very much an opening of, a letting the Samaritan in, the talking to women in a patriarchal society, all kinds of opening up of, rather than a closing down of.
The whole message of the Beatitudes is the acceptance and of the poor and the downtrodden and those who, the underdog, always for the underdog.
This is an us versus them statement, but don't you think that many, not all, evangelical churches do pay more attention to the Old Testament than to Jesus' teaching?
They would never admit that.
But
the theology, the black and white theology of the Old Testament, is a simpler theology to live. The broadening into love your enemies is a much more difficult. It blurs the black-white theology that the Old Testament preaches really easily.
it's just amazing that they continue to use the Christian label on themselves, because they don't think, in many cases, their teachings are very Christian.
Oh, but that's because, though, we have a lot of history of teaching things like this. The Spirit is only given after you convert. That it's not a universal Spirit. Not everyone, the Spirit doesn't live with everyone. The Spirit only lives after whatever has been done. And that's been so pervasive in Christian thought that it feels, in some people's minds, like that is absolutely the only way to view it. You can't have the Spirit because you haven't been saved yet. You can't have the Spirit because you haven't been baptized yet. You can't have the Spirit until I've laid my hands on your head and say, receive the Holy Spirit.
So you've been born again. Until
you've been born again. All of those kinds of conceptions that I believe control spirit. I think that at least part of what miracles are for me are the openness to something that you can't control. I have a favorite set of books.
I have to think about that for a second, Jim. Say that again.
I think that that at least part of what miracles are is an openness to something that you can't control.
Okay. I just had to wrap my head around that for a second because I kind of like that. Something, yeah, because that's essentially right down to the basic nut of it is like, I can't control this. The only thing I can hope for is a miracle to get me out of this.
Uh-huh. And at least part of, for example, if we go back to snake handling, I am controlling it. I somehow have that snake in my hand and I can do it, even though he's dangerous. I'm in control. You see, I proved God by being in control. I have a favorite set of books. They all have the name Small Miracles in them, written by a couple, and there's a number of different ones, and you can borrow them from me if you would like. But they're written by two Jewish women, Yida Halberstam and Judith Leventhal. And what they are is collected stories of things that go beyond the typical. So I'll just tell you a really, really simple one. This man's walking down the street after dark, and he hears in the bushes over here some kind of struggle. Now, the easiest thing to do in that type of moment is to get away from the danger, the trouble, problem, right? But he doesn't. He yells out, and the man who is attacking a woman there runs away. The woman's cowering in the bushes, and the man says, "It's all right. You're safe now." And the voice from the bushes says, "Daddy?" A miracle that he happened to have the courage to stop and do and be in that moment, not because it was his daughter he was saving, but because he chose to act out and be the person he ought to be, that God calls him to be. I think that's the type of miracle that is really amazing to me, where we have, because of who we choose to think we are, allows us to become something more than what we would be without it. That's why when I said what I said about you, Judy, going into the hollers of West Virginia, that was choosing to say, God called me to be certain type of thing. This is the way I can use my gift to speak into a different space, a different culture, and help in some way in that space.
Like you said, it's kind of how you define miracle.
It's how you define miracle, isn't it?
I mean, our very existence to me is a miracle.
Our very existence is a miracle. Every new life is a miracle, right? And two parents continuing to care for and raise what is essentially a helpless human being for the first however many years of their life. You know, those two parents continuing to be present in that child's life is a miracle. That's a miracle of relationship, because it doesn't happen all the time, right? The number of kids that have been abandoned by mother, father, or both even is tremendous. But why do we do that? I like to think that at least part of it is because of our investment in a belief that miraculous can occur in life. That God speaks in a burning bush. And I don't believe in a physical burning bush. But I do believe that somehow whoever the historic Moses was heard something, and I don't even mean heard it in a physical way, but heard some type of thing that called him out of who he was and towards who he could be, and chose to have the courage to be able to listen to and follow that miraculous voice that did that.
Of course, hearing voices in burning bushes today would be kind of a sign of mental illness. But
In some ways it would be.
I mean, if you want to get down to it, it's like, oh, you hear voices? Okay. But, I was reading a thing in National Geographic where they actually found a natural phenomenon that only happens every, not very often, where the sun hits on this area in the Middle East where it does seem like a bush is on fire. And it's through that. And they, that whole thing of how that may have even come about in the first place. But it makes me feel better to understand how that could have even come about in the first place, because it was a natural, it was a natural phenomenon, but it was so rare that it's considered a miracle.
Yeah.
And
But
just to hear that, I don't know, sometimes I think we hear that internal voice speak to us too, so loudly that it seems like it's coming from elsewhere.
that's right. And that's my point. I don't think it's rare. I think that voice speaks, but sometimes speaks in ways that doesn't feel like my internal voice. It feels like it's an other than my voice.
Yeah.
And I kind of like to believe that Moses came down from that mountain and said something happened up there. And I don't know, it was almost like a bush that was burning, but not being consumed, right? And he's using this metaphor to try to figure out what happened in that conversation with something that didn't quite feel like him, and it gets turned into a literal or larger than. But I think most of us have experiences of hearing the other in our own internal conversation. And I don't see that as a negative or a bad thing. In fact, in many ways, it's a wonderful and a powerful thing that even within myself, there's something beyond myself that can speak. But what is that when it comes down to it?
Is it your conscience?
Maybe, right?
Or that still quiet voice that when you take the time to be in silence and to be really attuned to your deepest self, that's the time a lot of times where it's like that. I also have an awful lot of voices speaking to me at 3 a.m. when I wake up or something.
Some of them are the drugs, just so you know.
This might solve that problem you're having. And it's like, that happens. That happens quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
It's like the mind is quiet enough that it's like, oh, okay, this might work.
But that's why dreams are often spoken of. Not a voice, but a dream that happens, like in the Joseph story. And Dr. Spong didn't call those miracles, but it is an instance of something seemingly beyond self that is telling a truth to you. And I go back to the word I used before, openness. Do I have the openness to listen and hear something that right now seems less than myself, less than what I'm used to, less than my experience? Do I give it a credence that says that it can be more than, even though it's less than? Can a dream speak truth to me? Can it become a burning bush moment for me. At least part of what we saw in the progression from Moses and Joshua, which were mostly nature miracles, to the idea of what was happening with Elijah and Elisha, which became much more healing and even bringing someone back from the dead miracles, to Jesus, which takes that and codifies it even more and even stronger. It's this idea of there's something that God is doing, something that larger than me is doing in a way that I can be open to, or that can shut me, that I can ignore, because it doesn't happen that way. Am I open to that larger then? Do I allow myself to become part of that for other people?
I have a strange thing happening to me.
Yes.
I have very vivid visualizations when my eyes are closed and I'm awake. I mean, I suddenly visualize the Sedona Valley, water, and my eyes are closed, and I don't remember this happening to me before, but it's a very vivid view, and I don't exactly understand, you know, maybe it's the artist in me that is creating these. Most times it's beautiful, you know, things I would love to paint. So I don't know where it's coming from, but maybe I'm going crazy. But anyway, that's kind of what's happening sometimes with me. And instead of just opening my eyes, I kind of enjoy the scenery. So I don't remember this happening before, but it's not a dream. I'm awake. But when I close my eyes, I have vivid visualizations, and I enjoy them. So,
yeah. And the thing of it is maybe it is a different way that you're looking at things. As some of your world is shut down around you, right? You haven't been able to get out as much. You haven't been able to do as much as you've closed down some of those busy stuff, which took your attention and time. Maybe your mind is saying, this is the way I'm going to open up to something more. And so
I don't need if I need to talk to a psychiatrist or not about it, but I'm enjoying it. So
yeah. Now the question I would ask you then is, what does that do for you? Does it just give peace to your soul, or is it calling you to paint me?
It's giving me peace, and it is calling me to paint.
Yeah.
It's doing both of those. It's saying, yeah, it definitely has this thing. I did, one of my visualizations is the Sedona area. And I recently completed a painting of that and actually entered it in a show. And it was called The Road to Sedona. So I'm having that particular very vivid visualization. It's very beautiful. It's not still, things are moving, you know. So it's very interesting. Do I need to talk to a psychiatrist about it?
No, it doesn't sound like it to me. It sounds like what you need to do is figure out how to allow that type of thing to move you even more. Because if you could somehow figure out how to paint that valley and give it a sense of movement, like you're seeing in your dream,
yeah,
would that be a remarkable thing to be able to figure out how to do?
Yeah.
Right? And so maybe that's what it's trying to call you towards, is how can you give that type of vision to somebody else in some way or another.
I'm gonna go get the recent picture I painted. Sure.
Okay, you get it. I'd love to see that. I think the thing that gets in the way, so for example, one of the things that we all equate with miracle is the picture that is in our head, mostly because of the movie 10 Commandments, of those walls of water and the folks passing through. Very nice. Thank you, Martha.
Wow.
Yeah.
it could be that I just recently painted it.
It
So
could be.
it's on my mind, but when I close my eyes, I see it again, but actually I'm moving up that Sedona, when you drive up to Sedona, you
Uh-huh,
drive through that valley.
uh-huh.
And so, but it's a very vivid visualization, and I'm not
Absolutely.
asleep.
And I
My
think the
eyes are
challenge
closed.
is how do we continue to not just take it in, but also express it out.
Uh-huh.
I think
Yeah.
miracles have to be a breathing in and out.
Yeah. So I've been thinking of painting more of that scene. I mean, it encourages me to explore more of that particular location and stuff. But I wasn't going to share that with anybody because I thought maybe people would think I was crazy. But
Here's the really good news, Martha. You didn't need that for us to think you were crazy.
yeah. So, I mean, it's on my mind. I entered it in a big show that would take
No.
me to the next status as
Absolutely.
a watercolorist.
Yeah.
So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it gets into this big show. So, so it's on my mind.
So
I become a SOAR member.
I love what you're doing with it. That whatever's going on in those dreams, those miraculous places, that you're using that to be able to change how you act in the world, how you move and express yourself in the world, and what you bring to other people. I love that you're entering it into a show so that someone else can see and maybe experience some of what you felt.
Yeah. I wasn't going to share that with anybody because
No, but thank you for doing that. I think that's a great thing to share.
Maybe I could share it to my psychologist or something.
There's reasons why many of the great change agents in the mental arts, if we can say that, the psychiatrists often use visualization type of techniques because those allow us to see things and become things that we may not be able to do without them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's just it's an amazing world out there. It's just I mean, I know you enjoy it because of you show it in your photography.
Yeah.
I always enjoy the photos that you have behind you. It knows that you get involved in what you're seeing around you.
Yeah.
And it's a miraculous thing, the world we live in. And
at least for me, part of what miracles are about is taking the moment to stop to be able to see it. And it's sometimes really hard. The other day, was it last night or the night before, the moon was poking through the clouds in such a way that I wanted to stop right there in the middle of the road, but all the drivers behind me didn't like that much. Because I wanted to take that picture because it was so miraculous. Right?
I once did take a picture while I was driving of the moon rising, and the sun was setting right behind me. And that happened the recent night that the moon was rising.
Like 2 days ago. It was just
it was the exact same time the sun was setting, and I had to run from one end of the house to the next. So I should have run up on the street, I guess, but then I would have lost him.
you might have. Go ahead. You were saying something.
The last few nights that the moon was out and stuff. So when I take Ginger out at night and backyard of Joyce's, it's really, really, you have this perfect view of the moon, and there's been a rainbow around it.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of moisture in the air. Yeah.
A moon bow.
A moon bow.
Right.
Moon glow.
Well, and what I want to encourage you to do is to continue to look for things like that. Continue to figure out where it is that in this moment you're interpreting between two people and essentially using the gift of tongues to help this person and that person be able to speak to each other. Where it is that you're listening to a person so well that you're interpreting more than just the words that are coming out of their mouth, but also what you can hear from their heart coming out in that. think about the ways that you see somebody reaching out and calling you to heal rather than to hurt. All of those are miracles that are there. And I think, to me, they're much more powerful than the pastor who hit somebody on the forehead and said, be healed, right? That to me is a show rather than a true miracle. Where is it that we find ways to communicate the power of what the miraculous is in those ways like that?
I think the miracle is if we all can understand how interrelated everything and we are with everything around us and with each other. That's the part that's missing right now in all of this, is that miracle that people aren't seeing of just how interreactive everything is.
Yeah. The miracle that I am praying for right now, because I think that there's amazing things in front of us, incredible things. It's whether we can get to them without killing each other. And I mean that literally, because in the other places where we've taken miraculous steps, sometimes it's, like the Reformation was a miraculous step, but the immediate effect in Europe was 1/3 of the people of Europe were killed. A third of the people in Europe.
War in this country.
Yeah, and could we have another civil war? It does not feel outside the pale, does it? And can we somehow figure out how to make this step, which I think we're going to make no matter what, but make it without it being an us against them, literally death situation? That would be a miracle, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I was reading the other day, there's a real possibility we could have two countries that each country would come up with an idea of having a different president won the election. We could have, a group of people who believe this person is president. We almost had it in 2020, and so it could be very well happen in 2024. It's like, we have two groups of people who each believe their candidate won.
Yep. And how do we speak between them? How do we help the miraculous somehow occur in the midst of that?
Yeah.
The good news is that I do believe that, while, like Dr. Spong, I don't believe that necessarily I have to take literally the things like the burning bush or even the healing of a blind man by Jesus. I'm not certain that I have to take any of that literally, but I do know that the power of what the stories are meaning, the presence of God in those places, is something that I can carry forward. And what's it mean about the presence of God in this moment? We've run out of time, and you haven't completely solved all the issues of miracles. But thank you for the stories and for the help that you've given to each other today. Next week, we are talking about, hold on, I got it right here. Somewhere down underneath everything. We're talking about atonement theology.
Uh-oh.
How do we fix each other? Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Jim?
Yes.
Next week is when I'm having, in fact, during this Zoom is when I'm having my first surgery. So is it Thursday night that is the other Zoom, or is it
Thursday night, 7 o'clock?
Thursday night, okay.
And the good news is, if you ever miss any of the discussions, I've recorded it. I send it to Karen almost, as soon as I can process it here, and she gets it up on the website pretty immediately. So, like, for example, Judy had another appointment she had to be at today, so she wasn't here, and so she is going to watch that.
Okay.
So she'll know everything you said.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Good thing we didn't talk about her.
That's right. Thank you, my friends, for your time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.